We are the Church of the Larger Fellowship, a Unitarian Universalist congregation with no geographical boundary, working toward creating a global spiritual community, rooted in profound love, which cultivates wonder, imagination, and the courage to act. Adapting to the COVID-19 pandemic has been difficult for many bricks-and-mortar congregations. Early on in the pandemic, we were in a unique position to assist many congregations with the transition. We hosted special episodes of The VUU, provided advice and counseling to religious professionals, and trained congregations for live streaming worship, all while providing robust online programming for our members. From worship to covenant groups, from classes to pastoral care, and from our monthly magazine to our letter writing ministry, we have found ways to build connection and community even through the screen. We have been a model for ministry on the margins, providing services for isolated Unitarian Universalists, becoming a spiritual lifeline for our members in prison, and investing in innovative ministry. We know better than anyone how deep and meaningful connections can be formed even from a distance. Unitarian Universalists have faced many challenges in these times, and we continue to persevere and to fight for justice and equity for all people, especially during moments of crisis. We are proud to be a leader in this faith movement, and we invite you to get involved in our ministry. We strive to be a place where anyone from anywhere can find spiritual refuge anytime they need it. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Larger Fellowship. We are so excited to bring you an all-new episode of The VUU. The VUU is a weekly Unitarian Universalist talk show discussing important faith-based topics from an anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and multicultural perspective. Every Thursday for the past 7 years, we have welcomed guests from every corner of the world. Our guests are writers, scholars, activists, and religious thought leaders who are shaping Unitarian Universalism and society for the 21st century and beyond. I hope today's show inspires you. Hope it builds your faith. Hope it gives you perspective to see the power of Unitarian Universalism at work in your life. Enjoy the message.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, or afternoon, I should say. I hope there is a little bit of joy in your heart after hearing that wonderful introduction. My name is Kiana Danae Perkins, and I am excited to open up the Church of the Larger Fellowship VUU show this morning. I have been a proud co-host for a little over a year and a half, depending on who's doing the math. And I physically reside in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but my heart lives in Minneapolis. Don't ask questions. It gets really complicated quickly. And today here in Michigan, the sun is beaming and it is beautiful. And at some point, I hope to walk outside. I get to be joined today by some of the most lovely, amazing people on the planet. And I'm going to throw it over to my good, dear heart friend, Aisha.
Hi, Kiana Danae. It is morning here in Seattle, Washington, where I am, where it wants to be winter, and I'm mad about it. I keep waking up to frost, and this is not something that's usual here in the Pacific Northwest. And I'm very excited about today's guest. We have Reverend Bob LaVallee. Bob, I think, Bob, you were here when we started the VUU, but we're going to introduce you in a minute. But we're going to meet the rest of our hosts who are here today. And I am so excited to throw it over to Chris and DC, or although DC might have been thrown off. Oh, DC's back. So Chris Rivera and DC Fortune. So this is fun having so many people on screen at the same time. Very excited.
Hey, y'all. I'm Christina Rivera, she, her pronouns. I'm coming to you from just really gray and misty Central Virginia, and the weather outside is just blah, yuck. And yesterday it was 72. So I really feel like, Virginia is just a little bit tipsy and doesn't know what it's doing, and just needs to take a break, take a minute, and figure it out. DC, how you doing?
Doing well. I am here in similarly gray and bleh South Jersey because we always get Chris's used weather. Yesterday was up around 70 here. It was amazing. I saw a meme the other day that seems to fit what's going on. It's like Mother Nature is throwing out drunken temperatures like Powerball numbers, just sort of random temperatures, like 70 and then 12. And then, yeah, it's bananas. But things are okay, I mean, the world's on fire, but what the heck, right? My little corner of New Jersey seems to not be snowing. So at this point, I'll take, and I have crocuses in my yard. I have crocuses. So that brings me hope. And I'm going to hand it over to, I think, Aisha and or Kiana Dene to do whatever's next, because I need more coffee.
Here's the party part. So I want to just acknowledge a couple things before we do the roundup. I want to thank you all for your patience. We have this person on the other end of our technology who they are weaving like they are just a master weaver. They were like a 12-armed spider back here in the back of the house doing all the things. So before we go into roundup, I don't know if they'll appreciate it, but I need to say out loud, I appreciate you, Tanner, and the work that you were doing in the back of the house to make sure that we could all be here and be fully present. So Tanner
Linden, our Church of Larger Fellowship communications director. Tanner is a genius. Yes, Tanner is the greatest of all time. Tanner is the GOAT. And being the Gen Xer that I am, it took me a minute when I would start seeing GOAT on social media. I was like, why are people calling each other GOATs? And then I figured it out. I'm good. So I'm actually going to introduce our guest because the Reverend Bob LaVallee is an alum of the Church of Larger Fellowship Learning Fellows program. And Bob and I met on The View when it was way back on Zoom still. And I think almost a whole different crew of hosts. Bob currently serves as the associate minister at the First Unitarian Church of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And today we're going to actually talk about a whole range of topics, and Bob will discuss, hopefully, his ministerial formation journey and how interning at an online congregation has formed his brick-and-mortar ministry, especially in the times of the pandemic. So, Bob, why don't you join us for UU Roundup, and let's talk about what's happening. Welcome. Good to see you, buddy.
It's so good to see you. It's watching that the promo, the lead-in video, and seeing all those faces, Laurie Stone and Terry Bernor, just like there were so many great people involved in the work, and so it's really great to be back.
Well, welcome.
Back and online. I was Tanner back in the day. So I was like so sympathetic,
and Zoom was Zoom's great, and it was a hot mess for this. No, and then were we even on Facebook? I'm trying to remember.
I think we were on Facebook, but we just hey Laurie, I see you in the comments. Awesome. Yeah, but we had all our disasters. I remember what can we swear on this? I can't remember. What's our policy?
Bob, have you met me? Yes, the policy.
Okay.
We swear.
When everyone was much less awkward with the video, and I remember one time we were actually doing a worship service, and I had these two little chihuahuas that kept barking, and I thought my mic was off, and I yelled at them, "Shut the fuck up!" And then it was not off.
That's hilarious.
So Meg was very polite and pretended that she didn't hear that. So
I would have started cracking up. God bless Meg. Oh, right. Google Hangouts. Oh, it was the worst. That was awful. It was never worked well. I mean, not never. Almost never.
Whatever. They all have their issues. Anyways, it's delightful to be here. I still, believe more than ever in what an online presence can do. And thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure. And you had mentioned, we were talking about UU Roundup being at the Institute a few weeks ago. I think would it be ridiculous to say it's the first UU gathering well, we're still in the pandemic. I'm not going to say post-pandemic. That would be a lie because we are still in the pandemic. but it was maybe about 100 people were there, 120, something like that.
The in person. Yeah. So for folks who don't know, the institute is the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association puts this on, I think, every other year. And although it's the UUMA this year, folks from Laredo, religious educators, were there too, which really enriched it. Sort of breaking down the silos of ministry and religious education. And I got to hang out with Aisha. We actually held hands during one of the really beautiful services. But the thing that was really interesting about this, and I think for folks who are, as we grapple in this moment, of like coming out of the pandemic and moving from purely online participation to adding in-person services, I think a lot of churches are trying to figure out how to do hybrid services, how to do simultaneously an online and in-person experience. And we've been struggling. I was convinced that it's not possible. Do you remember our experiment with Portland? Yeah, we tried really hard, but it just did not fly. But the thing that we learned, I think the UUMA, the Institute, they figured it out. Yeah. And what it was just a Zoom worship with all the cool things that we can do, pre-recorded music and videos and close-ups of people's faces when they're speaking. And then in San Diego, where the 100 or so folks were, we were just all in a big room together watching on big screens. So we got the benefit of being, side by side, having that like real, in-person interaction. So we didn't need the chat. I could do that with Aisha when she was sitting next to me, right. But people online were still having a quality experience because they could chat, they could do all those things that they do. And it was amazing because we had not thought about it that way at all. And I was really impressed. So.
Yeah, I agree. Let's bring everybody else on because I want to talk about the hybrid, what's happening. And Kiana Dene, before we went live, you had brought up a really good point about what lessons are we taking from the pandemic, or are we not taking that maybe would be helpful to take?
Well, I want to back us up even just one more step and do the roundup, because I don't want those folks who need that, who use us as a source of information. I don't want to lose that for them. So there's two national things, or maybe three, that we wanted to make sure that we weren't glossing over. But I don't feel like I can talk about them intelligently. But I feel like the words Ukraine and Texas are big are big red flags. So does somebody have more knowledge, and does somebody feel more comfortable speaking to those things that are happening in the world?
Ukraine's been invaded by Russia, and we're all, at least I'm hoping World War III doesn't happen, although I'm hearing on TikTok that it won't. And I don't know that TikTok's the be all and end all about whether or not World War III is going to happen. So that's all I know. And it's such a helpless feeling to be in the United States, where are we? Seattle, Albuquerque, Virginia, New Jersey, and the Ukraine's being invaded. And there's yet another war started by what I posted on Facebook this morning, is by small men. It's just, when are we going to learn as humans? It's so bizarre. But I can't speak to Texas is happening. So if someone else wants to speak to the batshit crazy Texas, please do.
Yeah.
I think they had their hand raised.
Oh, I was just going to bring into the room what's going on in Texas, because all of this is related, right? So the news out of Texas is that the Texas governor signed an order that states that the parents of trans kids can be investigated for child abuse. And so this is just a horrific, take on transphobia, transmisogyny. It's just the idea that parents who are trying to support their children through some of the most difficult moments in their lives, as they're becoming adults, now have to think that that they're going to be accused of child abuse by trying to affirm the person that their child is just horrific. I will say that that right away, a lot of, and I'll say that this is coming obviously from our fascist extremist right, but it has been couched a lot in Christianity, and trying to uphold those moral views. those quote unquote moral views around Christianity. And I've been really heartened that a lot of mainstream Christian organizations, Episcopal churches, schools, dioceses have said, we will not be requiring anyone to report the existence of trans kids or their parents in our churches or our schools. The government statement has absolutely no force of law, and all people are welcome in those places. And I would just say, even more so for the Unitarian Universalist congregations, that as far as I know, for religious educators, there is absolutely no legal or moral standing that we have to report parents trying to support their children in their gender identity. That would not cause us, any kind of reporting basis. So hang in there, folks in Texas, and hang in there, trans families. We know you, we see you, we love you.
That's a
Yeah,
lot, y'all.
It's
It is a
beyond,
lot.
and
It
it's
is a lot.
targeting children. I mean, that's the gross. It's horrific on so many levels. And really, let's be clear: it's Greg Abbott trying to distract from the investigation that will be open on him making money off of the
blackout.
The blackout. And so that's what this is about. I mean, that's what happens. But to target, and let's not forget Florida. The Don't Say Gay bill. I mean, let's be clear that Unitarian Universalism and Unitarian Universalists, we have a mandate to be public about we affirm people with. That's why I stopped using the term marginalized identities. I now say target identities, because there are identities being targeted by people in power. And so I don't say marginalized anymore, I say target. Yeah. And I'm holding in my heart all our trans siblings, our LGBTQI, Black, Indigenous people. I mean, it's
the pain that this is causing people just by the idea of it. Pain right here in this room is, my congregants, it's just so hard to watch. But New Mexico shares a long border with Texas, and we try to be an outlet for that. There's a great, the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice is a national organization that has state chapters. The one in New Mexico is really strong. When Texas, as Texas has moved to essentially ban abortion, we've been participating with them with really meeting abortion refugees is what we call them, and providing housing and funds for abortions and rides and support in that way too. In fact, when the deal went down, we actually at First Unitarian in Albuquerque, we hosted a public reading of the Roe v. Wade decision, and it was really fascinating and powerful. You'd think a Supreme Court decision would be boring, but it wasn't at all. And it was a great way to name what's at stake here. But right on, Chris. Name this. This is just all part of a fascist right-wing agenda, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. And people got to get up and scream.
Yeah, and I think, to me, it's no coincidence that this comes on the, the 80th anniversary of the internment of Japanese people during World War II.
Wow.
All of these things where we're trying to, turn our neighbors on one another, reporting in, turning our, let's be clear, we already live in a police state, but turning our citizens into a police state where we feel like we need to inform on one another, about the most basic liberties.
It's right out of the playbook too, right, Chris?
It's you could just take the handbook. You take the handbook and just oh yeah, that's what we were doing. Okay, well, how do we do it? How do we do it now? Yeah.
Wow. So I guess to bring us all back around, and there could be other things happening in UU world. We have 30 minutes. We'll get to them all. But just know that as we go into this conversation, we don't do it with unawareness, right? We understand the context in which we are talking, and having a funner dialogue is in the context of these bigger things happening, and we're holding both and, right? We have the capacity to do both. We acknowledge these things are happening. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to learn a little bit more. I've never met you, Bob. It's about time to party, and know that when we leave this space, we're going to take all that joviality in our hearts and use it to be a balm to the people in our community who need it the most, which can look like a lot of people in a lot of different ways. So just know we're not oblivious. We just are trying to keep our hearts as guarded and as safe as all of you do as well sometimes. So having said that, Bob, tell me about this amazing ministry and your amazing experience in Church of the Larger Fellowship.
It feels a little weird to talk about myself. I mean, I'm just like another seminarian who went through the process of formation, and all the ups and downs. I think the act of being in seminary is like a state of temporary derangement. It just, if you're doing it right, I think it really rocks a lot of the things. There was a point in my seminary career where I would wake up in the morning and just say, what am I going to find out I was wrong about today? Because it just, in a really healthy way, but that was also really disruptive. I was really having a lot of my fundamental beliefs challenged. But anyway, so sticking to the facts, I went to Meadville Lombard Theological School. I started in fall of 2013. Actually, had spent the previous year in Afghanistan, so it was a pretty crazy transition. 2 months after I got back, I'm in Chicago. And Meadville does a modified, does a low residency model where you're at the school for a few weeks at a time, and then a few months you go at home, and then back to school for a few weeks, and sort of varies over the course of the year, but that's the model. And in their second year, you have to find a congregation to do a halftime internship with. And I was in Buffalo, and there's a couple of fine churches there, but I wanted to be, I got really curious about the Church of the Larger Fellowship, because at the time I thought I did not want to be a parish minister, and I wanted to think about creative ways of extending the reach of ministry that weren't about bricks and mortar churches. So when I heard about the CLF, I was really excited, and it was led then by Meg Riley. Got the internship, and I remember, so this is kind of funny. I remember you have to get approval you have to apply to get your internship confirmed from the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, from the UUA. And there was still this tension around whether doing an internship at the Church of the Larger Fellowship was a legit internship. Is this a real ministry? Can you be doing real church online? And it was a fight. It was a battle, and like Meg had to intervene and all that. And then when society fell apart and we all went online, all the Church of the Larger fellows were like, I know how to do this.
Right.
This is my moment.
Yep.
And there was like a collective national high five tag, we're in, But the thing I found at the Church of the Larger Fellowship was that real church does happen there. We can have real religious experiences online. None of this is news anymore, but in 2014, this was like a complete shocker that people could have real religious experiences, could have a real sense of community and communion in an online worship if it's done well. And we use all our tools pretty effectively. The other thing that's funny, it is funny, it's a different kind of community. I remember the first General Assembly I went to after I'd been preaching on the CLF channel for a while. People would come up to me and say, hey, Bob, who I'd never seen. And I realized they'd been coming to CLF worship, and I just never seen their faces because they were just a name on the list. And and they all would say, oh, you're taller than you look online. This is hilarious. So it was really formative in the sense, so March 12th, right? 2020, we're all sitting there. I was actually at a Mountain Desert District UUMA retreat up in Loveland, Colorado, and we were all watching the reports come in and seeing things sort of falling apart and anticipating what's going on. And as my boss, the amazing Angela Herrera, and I were there, and we just stepped out and decided to go have a good serious talk about what to do next. And we found this like empty kitchen in this like conference center, and we sat down and especially for Angela, for whom live worship is a fundamentally life energizing moment, it was really hard for her to consider going online. And I remember we were kind of discussing the pros and cons, going back and forth, and she said, let's pray. And we put our heads down and we're quiet for a while. And when we stopped, Angela said, as I was praying, the faces of people that I love in this congregation were passing through my mind. And these are folks that we know to be vulnerable because many of them are elderly because of the pandemic. And, the right thing to do is close down. So we were really conservative and we shut right down. It helped so much for me to be able to say, I know how to do this. It's going to be rough, but I know how to do this. And our staff was amazing. Our music director, Susan Peck, who lost so much in losing the ability to sing together, gather groups. That's so much her vocation. But she pivoted on the technology so brilliantly. She was just amazing. Taught herself all these new software packages for basically doing online choir. And Angela was on board too, and we trained up a bunch of volunteers to do the tech side, and hired a tech arts director, and got it rolling.
Wow.
Yeah. Do folks have questions? I feel like I'm just going on and on.
No, the question I posed before we came on screen, I think is still relevant, which are, what are some of the things that you knew how to pivot? I think all of us learned how to pivot at some point in the last 2 years. Yeah. I turned my camera off for a treat. I needed to eat something. I'm sorry, y'all. It's noon here. It's almost 1:00. So sorry. Hi.
You gotta eat.
Substance, right? I need food and I need spiritually to be fed. So my question that I asked before we all came on, y'all, is this: how do we take the lessons that we've learned in the time of COVID, particularly around electronic access for all the parts of the ways that we've done it over the last 2 years, and move those into what's next? How do we not lose the lessons? And that's my big fear, is that we've gathered such a big body of work. How do we start to sift through it for the lessons before the time moves so fast we're just like, oh, back to normal and nothing ever happened? That's my biggest fear.
Well, the lesson is accessibility, because let's be clear, it's been much more accessible to many more people. I mean, yes, there's been the loss of being together in person, and that is a significant loss. And there's been a significant gain, and folks with seen and unseen disabilities have been very clear at how much more accessible the world has been. And there's folks who are able to gather in person who are chomping at the bit to do that. And the question is how to do this while not leaving anyone behind.
Yeah.
We added a second in-person service in mid-September with a lot of anxiety and a lot of precautions that we're still maintaining, which we have an overflow. We limited capacity in our sanctuary. So for folks to understand the context, we're a big church. We have 750 members. And so we have a big sanctuary, but we actually only use every other row. We have spacing in between people's pods. And we have an overflow room in our social hall where the videos, the service is broadcast, where people can be in, and it's even more spacious. And people are required to wear masks. Anyways, we're committed to continuing a Zoom worship service, whatever the situation is going forward. We actually added 40 members over the last 2 years, and many of the folks are not in Albuquerque, or not even in New Mexico. They're in Colorado and California and the East Coast, and they just like what we're doing. They want to be a part of this. So we're going to continue to do Zoom, and I love that there's the seen and unseen disability piece that we give accessibility to. There's folks who are rural and same as the CLF audience that don't have access. The nearest VUU church is 200 miles away. But here's another interesting thing. there are folks in our congregation, people of color, who are actually happier to be on Zoom because, as a majority white congregation, they hesitated to go to in-person worship because of the fear of microaggressions that they were going to experience. And UUs as an imperfect people are still prone to doing that. And to provide that level of safety for folks, it saddens me that it's necessary, but I'm also delighted that we're giving people a safe place to participate in worship.
And I think we can't understate how important this is as a covenantal faith, the cross-pollination between congregations. This is absolutely what we need to be doing if we want to be a covenantal faith, if we want to be congregationally based, if we want to say that our congregations get to decide, they don't just get to decide in a vacuum. They get to decide in covenant with all of the other congregations. And how can you be in covenant with the other congregations if you don't know them? Right?
Wait, what?
Right? So like this ability to be in multiple congregations and bringing back and forth between congregations the best of what Unitarian Universalists can be, that is more than and I don't like how this was about to come out, just serving folks with visible and invisible disabilities. That's not what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying is it is part of our faith to make sure that we aren't leaving anybody behind, but even more so, it's part of our faith to actually get to know one another outside of our little bubble congregation. And so,
what? That sounds like the Cambridge platform. What blasphemy is this? Congregations talking to one another?
Congregational polity doesn't mean you get to go it alone. Congregational polity means that the congregation down the road gets to say, hey, what the fuck are you doing? Stop that shit and get real. Like, that's what congregational polity means.
That's the wild card on the bingo. That's the wild space on the bingo when Chris says fuck.
I did feel a little bit like, oh, wow. And I guess I want to, because I think that you were talking, I wish people's names are on the bottom because my memory, is it Bob or Dave?
Bob LaVallee.
Bob. Okay, his name's not on the bottom. My mind is doing too many things. I wanted to say, and it brings it back around to the, Church of the Larger Fellowship and the Teaching Fellow. The way that I came to this question was I'm in seminary, Star King represent, and I'm starting to think about CPE and seminary, and internships. And there was a time 2 years ago when there was remote options. And as I look at things for the coming years, there isn't any remote options. It's almost like we forgot the economic, social, and other impacts of not having people move across the country like that. I don't have the ability to uproot my kids for a 9-month internship that doesn't pay a living wage. Like, that's not practical. It doesn't make any sense. And to require that of me seems more harmful than helpful, and I might be missing details. So it started to make me think, if this is a level of accessibility and access that I lost from my perspective of privilege, what does that mean to the brown family whose nearest church is predominantly white and they experience microaggressions? Like, if they were to be, like, if it's impacting me and I have access and privilege, how's it impacting other folks who are targeted, as my friend Aisha would say? Yeah. So that's the perspective I came in.
Absolutely. And just a shout out to the CLFUU. Gotta put it out there. When Aisha, Michael, and I started as co-leads, one of the things that we noticed was that although we were compensating our learning fellows at the recommended UUA guidelines rate, that was actually less than $15 an hour. And there was no way that we could do a fight for 15 if we weren't even paying folks $15 an hour. So we immediately rectified that plus some. And we are so excited this year. Michael Tino is the direct supervisor of our Learning Fellows. When we went to post our Learning Fellow application this year, Michael noted that almost every congregation that is on there has brought their wage up to match what the CLF is doing.
Nice.
So that again, the CLF modeling how to do this in a way that
nice.
That actually works for people.
And in that, Chris, I see those differences financially, but if it requires that I also move across country from one economic place to another in a way, then it's not the same. You know what I'm saying? Like $15 in Ann Arbor is not $15 in Boston, right? Like those are two different worlds, and it doesn't account for the fee it cost me to move where I have secure, safe housing in Ann Arbor to Boston for a 9-month stay. It doesn't justify that. I'm not 20 years old. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not 20. And even when I was 20, I might have done it, but I would have been reluctant. And at some point, I'm going to roost, right? I'm going to root. And so how do we support folks to do things that are actually in alignment with the way that the world is moving, the way that we are moving? I don't want to take up too much more space other than to say I'm glad that we're having this conversation. It felt really silo-y, like me and my friends were having it, and it felt like it was just us having a conversation, right? Like nobody else was paying attention. So some of this conversation for me, y'all, is about being seen, is about that my fears as I move into this work. What will my world look like? What will I have to support? What tools of access will I be able to give the people I love? And I get a little nervous.
This issue has, and I mean, and Bob, I do want to hear about your experience. The issue of ministerial formation, how inaccessible and expensive it is, and what is asked of everyone who's gone through it, has been on the table for many, many years. And so what makes me sad is, Kiana, Danae, I hear you saying that it feels isolating, but the thing is, like, there's not enough talking about how I have not met one person who's gone through this process who hasn't named significant challenges, the biggest being how much in debt people get, which makes me want to weep. And then the challenge of an internship and what gets counted as an internship, because Bob, you're absolutely right. I mean, anybody who's gotten the CLF has been a fight, which is weird. It's like, what? How is this? Now we know, right? The CLF is, like you said, Bob, every single person who was a learning fellow was high-fiving internationally. Because you all were there, you already know what to do. But it's tragic, really, because what is our faith doing? Like, well, it's not the faith. There's a difference between the institution and the faith. And I'm firmly a Unitarian Universalist. And the UUA is doing the best they can. This is not at all, I'm not going to, I just think we lack imagination when it comes to this.
I think we lack imagination, and there are times when we are very, very human, and human nature, I think, sometimes is a lot like electricity and water, and that takes the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
You know, like, this is the easiest. We want to get XYZ done. Oh, look, here's a shortcut. Let's do it, because then we can get it done, and we want to be the most economical. We want to be the fastest. We want to exert let's not say that. We don't want to do work. We want to be as efficient as possible with our energy. Okay. Which an impolite translation is, we don't want to work hard. And we want to get it done. And we like to do it on the cheap. And so we forget that we're doing it that we seem to let go of our values in order to achieve some sort of merit badge or something. I don't know, to say, oh, we have interns, look at us, we have interns. Well, yeah. I just posted in the chat, I did my internship in the Bay Area of California, and I made $1,400 a month. Which in the Bay Area will get you not even a space on someone's couch. Okay, I ended up re-enrolling in seminary. I went to PSR in one of their certificate programs so that I could get student loans so that I could have a place to live.
Wow.
right? So my internship added $25,000 to my debt.
You paid to work.
I did. And the congregation was like, we're doing the UUA guidelines. And I'm like, and are those guidelines moral?
Right.
Are those guidelines within our actual values? You know,
Yeah,
and
'cause
out there, I said,
guidelines-
if you had given me $1,400 and housing,
right.
that might have been okay, right? Even if it was a
Right.
mother-in-law apartment, an illegal apartment over somebody's garage, whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, I had to take out loans and commit to extra academic work in addition to my internship so that I could get money to live. Yeah.
We have a
Hey,
question. We have a question from the chat I'd like to bring in from Natalie Danner. Seminary is expensive. Do congregations help to pay for prospective seminarians, like scholarships, etc.?
Congregations
don't explicitly take that on because they don't know. Our congregation has been a teaching congregation for a long time. We almost always have interns, and we pay well relative to the larger thing, but people still have to relocate. And that is a big ask. And we're asking ourselves how to fix that. Like maybe we're gonna start thinking about relocation expenses, like paying people for their move. That's like $5,000 right there, right? But even that still is like, I don't know if it's a thing. The thing is like, we're talking about really big, you know, this problem is much bigger than just seminary education. Like higher ed is just so broken right now. What people do to become educated, how we punish them for that, and it's, you know, so it's going to require a larger fix. I guess the thing I'm asking myself is, what parts of the seminary education or the path of formation are necessary to become a UU minister, and are we choosing the right parts? Is there the right emphasis? Do we need a 3-year MDiv degree? That'd be an interesting conversation. Do we need CPE? Absolutely, CPE is essential if you ask me. Do we need internships? I think the value of the internship depends a lot on the placement and the quality of the supervisor. But I think
and if we are forced, and I would just want to throw in here, if I'm forced to pick a bad placement because it has the best wage or the best accessibility, then it means I'm not actually fulfilling the requirement of formation. It means that I'm acquiescing to jump through a hoop. It means I'm not being the best minister. I'm being the most practical minister.
Right.
That's right. And that's capitalism.
So there's a question in the chat to define CPE. CPE is clinical pastoral education, and it's generally done sometimes elsewhere, but in a hospital setting. It's like the chaplains that you meet when you're in a hospital setting, but it can be done elsewhere as well. But it's really an intensive time that you often don't get paid for, and sometimes have to pay to be able to do.
Yeah, I paid for mine. I paid thousands of dollars for mine.
Yeah, in order to do that. And I think this all goes back to the great question that we got asked was, do congregations pay for this? And it's a great question because the way ministers were typically formed way back when, that got us to our congregational polity that we have, is that a congregation identified within itself someone who was speaking a calling into the world. And they said, we would like you to get more training and come back and do this for us, right? There was an exchange, there was an expectation. But yes, they supported that individual in going and getting the further education and going and learning from others, and then coming back to the congregation and being able to share that learning. So yes, that's congregational polity. That's like saying, I'm looking within my congregation and this is what I'm going to do. it didn't mean that what we have now, which is this random, I'm going to pick whoever it is that I think is going to work, and that's my congregational polity. Because and so to answer the question, yes and no. So most congregations do not provide for seminary scholarship. However, many congregations do support the UUA through the annual program fund, and the UUA does have some scholarship programs for ministerial formation as well as religious educator formation. So it's a really small yes. It's a bigger no, but there are, I have to give it up for the ways in which we are trying to do that.
Yeah. I'm encouraged that student loan forgiveness has been liberalized, and now I see some UU ministers taking advantage of that, and I hope to do that too. So that's a little bit of, actually, it's a lot of help. I had my student loans forgiven. Holy cow.
That would help the national economy. The ministerial formation process in Unitarian Universalism should be difficult, but it's difficult in the wrong ways right now. It replicates bullshit PhD rather than actually, how many, hashtag not all ministers, but I've met too many ministers who genuinely hate people and don't really understand it. I said what I said. And I worked with one who fucking yelled at me. So, like, I'm sorry. Okay. I've had bad days. I assure you, there's not one person who I've worked with for the last even 30 years, even when I was a social worker, who I've yelled at. Not one. So, and not because I haven't been angry, but there's some lines you don't cross. And like, so that is all to say, again, hashtag not all ministers. However, the ministerial formation process needs to center Unitarian Universalism and people and connection and empathy. And it doesn't do that enough. It does it kind of just enough to check off. I hear it's changing. I do. Elias Ortega, president of Meadville, I see you. And Reverend Rosemary Bray McNatt, president of Star King. They both have spoken to this, and I understand it's changing. So I don't want to erase that. I'm simply naming that the process, because I looked at it, as soon as anybody pays attention to, everybody's like, go to seminary. And I'm like, I already have an MSW, but okay, let me check this out. And it just wasn't for me, but I love religious education. And I ended up here with Chris and Michael as part of the lead ministry team. So I think being centering Unitarian Universalism is huge. And I think if more and more of us did that, because here's the thing, Chris, when you were talking earlier about congregations knowing each other, the thing that puzzles me, and I know we have 2 minutes left, but it does puzzle me, and maybe this is a whole nother show. I know that ministers in general, ordained clergy, are a tight network. So the idea that you all as ministers are a tight network, but somehow your congregations have no clue who each other are, something's not making sense to me. So where's the disconnect in having, like, not just the leaders of these congregations be BFFs, but also the people? And that's just kind of an open question, because there's a disconnect there.
I got to tell you, the congregation, it's a small congregation in Boston where I became a UU back in the 90s. I was a member of that. I was in Boston, in a neighborhood in Boston. I was a member of that congregation for 5 years before I learned that there was such a thing as the UUA, because there was just no connection to the larger movement. And that was a ministerial preference. I see that now. That was that minister just like not
exactly
there, So we have a denominational affairs committee, and we just that connects, and is part of PWR, Pacific West Region, and like I'm always saying, like, we're part of a movement. We're not just doing this in isolation, but that's got to come from the ministers. Yeah, if it's not happening, it's the ministers.
Thank you, Bob, Reverend Bob LaVallee.
Hold on a second. I have been at a handful of different congregations, and the ministers have tried, including myself, have tried desperately to get folks to understand that we are part of a movement. We have this larger connection. And West Coast, they're just like, Boston, what? Might as well be Mars, And even here in South Jersey, where I am, they're just like, Boston seems like this, it might as well be Mars. It's just this other place where things happen. They have a closer connection with their regional staff. But that even that's limited. That's sort of like, oh, we fucked something up, come help, right? There's that. And when I was in the Midwest, Boston was sort of, to be fair, the UUA has not always served our congregations outside the 495 corridor well. And the UUA has a history of, not to the extent of the Catholic Church, but shuffling around badly behaving ministers. And there are plenty of congregations out there that have a lot of heartburn towards the mothership in Boston for good reason.
Yep.
Okay.
And
now, much as I love the mothership in Boston, I get that.
I want to come back and talk about that, because there are
that's a happy hour. That ain't even a whole nother show. That's a happy hour.
That's a mini that you need 4 shows at minimum. That is a whole DC. You said a mouthful there, and we are at the top of the hour. And I want to honor our time and thank everybody. This was so, as always,
it's a gift.
Amazing,
it's a gift.
An amazing show. And Bob, what a reunion we had.
I love you, Aisha. It's always good to
Bob. It's always great.
You.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You are the best. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for the good work you do. Seriously, I think being a teaching congregation is speaking to the future of the congregation, the future of the movement, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you.
Thank you. Hope to see you again soon. Bye, everybody. See you next week for another amazing show. Thank you for joining us. Special thanks to those of you who give generously to this ministry. It is because of you that this ministry is possible. You can click the link in the description to give now, or visit CLFUU.org/give for more information. We hope you will join us next week for another episode of The VUU.